All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. I'm going to do part 3 of a Mindgasms vlog today on the book, The History of Sexuality, Part 1 by Michel Foucault. I know it's been a while since I did one of these, but this is part 3. And yeah, I know it's been a while since I did part 2, but I'm going to try to do the next part way sooner than this one. Anyway. Foucault did what is called historiography in many of his books that are often put into the category of philosophy. Historiography is basically the history of ideas, concepts, and perspectives. In Discipline and Punish, which I made a video about a while ago, I'll add a link for that somewhere in the video and in the description for this. Foucault writes about the history of cultural attitudes and behavior toward criminals. In Madness and Civilization, which I will make a video or write a blog about later, Foucault talks about the history of cultural attitudes and behavior toward people with mental disorders. In all of the handful or so of his books that I've read, Foucault seems to analyze how these cultural attitudes have changed from approximately the 1600s to the 1800s and through to today. He also uses multifactorial analysis. He explains the contributing causes that led to behaviors and attitudes changing from many different angles. There are many reasons that attitudes towards certain groups of people and behaviors change throughout history. So Foucault writes about sexual desires and how confessing them was affected by Protestantism, the Counter-Reformations, and modern medicine. These factors collectively influenced the way that sexual behavior was categorized, scientifically analyzed, and pathologized. It heavily impacted the cultural conception of sexuality. Here's what Foucault says about it. The confession was, and still remains, the general standard governing the production of the true discourse on sex. For a long time, it remained firmly entrenched in the practice of penance. But with the rise of Protestantism, the Counter-Reformation, 18th century pedagogy, and 19th century medicine, it gradually lost its ritualistic and exclusive localization. It spread. It has been employed in a whole series of relationships. Children and parents, students and educators, patients and psychiatrists, delinquents and experts. The motivations and effects it is expected to produce have varied, as have the forms it has taken. Interrogations, consultations, autobiographical narratives, letters. They have been recorded, transcribed, assembled into dossiers, published, and commented on. It is no longer a question simply of saying what was done, the sexual act, and how it was done, but of reconstructing in and around the act, the thoughts that recapitulated it, the obsessions that accompanied it, the images, desires, modulations, and quality of the pleasure that animated it. For the first time, no doubt, a society has taken upon itself to solicit and hear the imparting of individual pleasures. Oh, it's so great. So Foucault is talking in that quote about how it became common in Western culture to describe to everyone how guilty you feel about your sexual desires. We can't just go around thinking about sex and being sexually attracted to people because that's bad. All of the details surrounding sexuality, including our behavior and even our thoughts, have to be compiled in minute detail. Everything has to be analyzed and categorized. We all have to collectively draw attention to sexuality as if it's something unnatural or unusual. Foucault explains one of the ways in which sexual confession came to be understood in scientific terminology in this next quote. Through a clinical codification of the inducement to speak, combining confessions with examination, the personal history with the deployment of a set of decipherable signs, the interrogation, the exacting questionnaire, and hypnosis with the recollection of memories and free association, All were ways of reinscribing the procedure of confession in a field of scientifically acceptable observations. That's so great, too. So Foucault is saying that sexuality became scientific through turning confession into a clinical examination. When your personal history is heard, a specific label is slapped onto it based on specific characteristics of your behavior. This is how your sexual desires can be scientifically observed. You performed these particular actions and have these distinct thoughts, which are inherently and biologically associated with a specific type of person. This means that you are somehow exactly the same as everyone else who has similar desires and biological characteristics. Another way that sexual confession has been looked at scientifically is through interpretation. Confessing our dirty, true sexual desires scientifically validates the act of confession. However, just confessing is not enough. The truth of our sexual behavior cannot be validated and pathologized until it is recorded and analyzed. The interpretations of our desires are far more important than the confessions themselves. What a priest, scientist, or psychiatrist says about our sexual behavior is the most essential component of classifying ourselves and figuring out how flawed and immoral we are. This is how confession became a scientific process. Foucault said this about the method of interpretation. If one had to confess, this was not merely because the person to whom one confessed had the power to forgive, console, and direct, but because the work of producing the truth was obliged to pass through this relationship if it was to be scientifically validated. The truth did not reside solely in the subject who, by confessing, would reveal it wholly formed. It was constituted in two stages, present but incomplete, blind to itself in the one who spoke. It could only reach completion in the one who assimilated and recorded it. The revelation of the confession had to be coupled with the decipherment of what it said. The one who listened was not simply the forgiving master, the judge who condemned or acquitted. He was the master of truth. By no longer making the confession a test, but rather a sign, and by making sexuality something to be interpreted, the 19th century gave itself the possibility of causing the procedures of confession to operate within the regular formation of a scientific discourse. Another way that Foucault explains how sex became perceived as scientific is, quote, through the medicalization of the effects of confession, unquote. He says, the obtaining of the confession and its effects were recodified as therapeutic operations, which meant, first of all, that the sexual domain was no longer accounted for simply by the notions of error or sin, excess or transgression, but was placed under the rule of the normal and the pathological, which, for that matter, were the transposition of the former categories. Sex appeared as an extremely unstable pathological field, a surface of repercussion for other ailments, but also the focus of a specific nosography. That means the systematic description of diseases. Foucault uses big words. Nosography, that of instincts, tendencies, images, pleasure, and conduct. This implied furthermore that sex could derive its meaning and its necessity from medical interventions. It would be required by the doctor, necessary for diagnosis, and effective by nature in the cure, spoken in time to the proper party, and by the person who was both the bearer of it and the one responsible for it, the truth healed. That's so brilliant. So Foucault is saying here that confession became medicalized. It began to be interpreted as therapeutic to confess your dirty sins and desires, have them diagnosed, then be offered supposed cures. Sounds a lot like gay conversion therapy, which we all know about today, right? It became the culturally accepted view that sex is both pathological and normal, but not normal in a good sense. Normal in the sense that sex is pathological for everyone. Foucault also argues that the categories of error, Sin, excess, and transgression got replaced by the normal and the pathological. So everyone is inherently sinful, prone to error, excess, and transgression. That's what normal means in this sense. And this is a pathology. Sex was labeled as a disease because it was seen as an essential component of our inherent sins and flaws. Instincts, tendencies, images, pleasure, and conduct were put into the same category of sex as a disease. But don't worry, your dirty sins and pathologies can be cured with a medical solution. With medical solutions. There's totally a cure for sexual desire, bro. The truth of your immoral, filthy diagnosis and scientific cure shall set you free. So, this is where I'm going to stop for now. I'm probably going to do several more videos on this book because I marked so many pages when I was reading it. I hope you all find Foucault's analysis on how cultural attitudes towards sex have changed throughout history to be as fascinating as I think it is. And thanks so much to everyone for watching this Mindgasms vlog, and thanks so much to everyone who likes, shares, comments on this video, and subscribes to my channel. Also, thanks so much to anyone who subscribes to me on Patreon, and to those of you who already have done so. That all really helps me out a lot, and you have no idea how much I appreciate it. So, like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. Alright, everyone? Keep having mindgasms and spreading your mindgasms all over the place. And adios until next time.